Malta, 1981. Dominic Mintoff wins another term for the Maltese Labour Party. This despite being the fact that the Nationalist Party had 5,000 more votes. This didn't help the already violent Maltese political scene. Bombings, paramilitary violence, protests, civil disobedience, all increased. From the way they dressed to the products they bought, the two sides refused to agree on anything. Mintoff's personal crusade were against the Catholic Church, of which 90% of the population was a member of at the time. He shut church-run hospitals, he limited the construction of churches, and he closed the University of Malta's theology department. Ultimately, he aimed to confiscate around 70% of church property. He also had a habit of making friends with many of the world's most unpopular leaders. Mao, Kim Il-sung, Ceausescu, Gaddafi. He went as far as to allegedly allow Libyan terrorist bases in the country, and he invited the Libyan army to train the Maltese army, and the North Korean army to train the new special mobile unit of the Malta police. In reaction to this, the Nationalist Party walked out. They left Malta as a one-party state with less than half the country's support. Then, in 1983, a former British serviceman, Tony, was contacted by a friend, Joseph, a Maltese businessman and local political activist. He was interested in getting his hands on some military equipment, but this inquiry went nowhere until about a year later when he asked again. Tony contacted Mike, formerly the TA, the RSF, and the South African Defence Force. He had a number of connections and he could get Joseph what he wanted for a price. Tony relayed this back to Joseph, who hesitated and wanted to know exactly what was on offer. This made Tony suspicious. He realised that Joseph was just acting as a middleman and he actually had no knowledge of what was going on. Tony, however, did get a list from Mike, who said he could provide L1A1 SLRs, FN mags, various handguns, ammunition and explosives. Then he passed this back on to Joseph. In November 1984, Tony received an unsigned typewritten note. It read, "Hello, I'm a person who will be coming over to do the dealings and you know me very well, but for now no names. I'm in possession of your last letter, and at this stage all I can say is that we're definitely interested and want some of the stuff. As to the quantity, I'll let you know very soon. We'll be over there approximately by the end of the month with another person, so you can wait for me to come back and knock on your door, and when you see who I am, you'll know what I came for. Regards and thanks." Tony soon received a phone call from the letter writer, who turned out to be another old acquaintance named Mario, thought to be a member of a nationalist hit squad, who told Tony that they wanted £10,000 in arms and equipment. Tony told Mario that this amount was insignificant, but agreed to meet him and discuss the situation. He alerted Mike of the development, who was disappointed on the amount, but he was relieved that things were finally moving along. In December, Tony met Mario and his partner Vincent in the ticket office of London's Euston Station. The three went into the West End and talked over coffee, and then Tony left the two to meet Mike at Shake's pub opposite Victoria Station. They caught the tube to Green Park, and they met Mario and Vincent at a hotel. They spent half an hour discussing supplies. Mike let the Maltese know that he could supply a few new HKG-3s, some FN rifles, most likely FALs, pistols, a few low anti-tank launchers, and grenades, but he did warn that additional items would necessitate overseas travel. He also had a source in Italy who could get hold of some Mac 10 or 11s with silencers, which Vincent seemed keen to get hold of. Mac was also asked if he could get hold of tranquilizer guns, as the Maltese didn't want to inflict collateral damage. Finally, they explained the plan. The Maltese first intended to destroy the radio mast near Gargoyle in North Malta, as well as some gunboats or patrol boats moored at Marsamset Harbour. The Maltese also asked for advice on how to carry this out, before suddenly, Vincent raised the question. "Listen, suppose we decided to hire outside help for this instead of buying this stuff for ourselves. Suppose we wanted to hire some men to do these jobs for us. Is this possible?" The idea was discussed, and Tony and Mike agreed that the radio mast would be a little fuss. The patrol boats, however, would require some more planning. The idea was also floated of assassinating Mintoff, which would cancel out the rest of the plan, as the sabotage was established to be part of an attempt to persuade him to step down. At the end of the meeting, Mike estimated the cost of the plan at around £1 million. While the Maltese said this was no issue, this worried Tony and Mike, who had the idea that their employees were getting out of their depth. Tony later said, "I think then that we knew everything was liable to get out of hand and jeopardise whatever we had so far. I mean, knocking out some lightly protected installations was one thing, but this talk of killing Mintoff and the sum of money involved was slightly ridiculous. I'm not saying it couldn't have been done, but I doubted whether the Maltese could actually put up that kind of money that Mike was asking." Despite this, Tony and Mike began putting a team together. Mike was also given a plane ticket and left for Malta to write up a feasibility report. After the London meeting, Mario became the sole point of contact for Tony and Mike. Vincent was never seen of again, and they weren't informed as to what his role was in the first place, and Joseph was removed due to being, quote, too unreliable and prone to talk too much. Despite this, Mike's report was confident. Neither objective had any insurmountable problems, but he was unsure about how to get the arms and equipment onto the island. While some could be imported legally or purchased locally, the rest would have to be smuggled in. Tony suggested landing the goods in on Geminis or similar small boats, landing at Mistra, a cove off St. Paul's Bay in the northwest, and stashing everything on secret. This being without Mario's knowledge to prevent a double cross. At this point, a third man was brought in to sink the boats with Tony. They rented a car and drove out to Tashbesh to study the target. They planned to enter the water there and swim the 250 metres to the target underwater, then attach time-shaped charges to the boats, swim back, change, and drive out in the hire car. Tony planned to use basic scuba gear, but the others wanted to use rebreathers to minimise the chance of sentries detecting bubbles from the tanks. Tony, however, was worried that breathing pure oxygen introduced an unnecessary risk, and besides, he'd be looking for bubbles from a scuba tank at 3 AM on a winter's morning in Malta. Mike also brought in 2 old colleagues from his Africa days, who were to plant timed explosives on the mast. The plan was to detonate all the explosives at once for the best effect. While the plan was almost set, things were complicated by Mario, who sent a list of additional targets. Helicopters at Lucca, the main ammunition depot at Mostar, the Mediterranean oil field services at Manuel Island, the Telemalta building at Mesida, as well as gas, oil, electricity installations, parliamentary and other political buildings, and various military barracks and outposts. Then things fell apart. The team waited in London for the signal, and had yet to be paid, but they'd never see any money, and they'd never be contacted again. To make matters worse, while in Malta, Mike had become involved in a scheme involved with scamming a local tough man, who later tracked him down and considered him for assassination in London. He did, however, manage to escape. And then, Mintoff stepped down. He had stated his intention to resign when a suitable successor was ready, but there is also room for speculation. The level of violence in the country was still increasing when he stepped down, and he had briefly mentioned fears concerning, quote, preventing a coup if anyone's foolish enough to make one, all the way back in 1981. Maybe he had sensed the way the winds were blowing, and he got out before things exploded. One thing's for sure, though, his resignation didn't do much for Malta. The violence would eventually peak in 1986-87, and then be followed by a Nationalist Party victory at the 1987 election. After this, the violence ended for the most part, and relations between the Nationalist Party and the Labour Party would begin to thaw. And then, after the end of the Cold War, the Labour Party would realign themselves and become much more moderate. And since then, Malta's become significantly more peaceful, and despite occasional incidents, haven't returned to the likes of the 1980s. And on that note, that's really all there is to say about that. All this information comes from a set of interviews done by the author Anthony Rogers in the late 80s with the Mercenaries involved, and the only other information is locked in the UK National Archives until the 2050s. But regardless, let me know what you thought of the video. I'd appreciate any feedback whatsoever, whether it's on topic or the technical side of things, audio quality and the like. And other than that, I'll keep it short and sweet. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it if you made it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something new. Thanks.